In my videos and in initial Alexander technique lessons, I'm frequently explaining the different movements that one needs to coordinate in order to either perform a gesture or make an adjustment to the body. Sometimes a pupil or viewer will ask me why I don't just demonstrate the adjustment or gesture that we're working on. This is an understandable question. We are very familiar with learning through imitation. But F.M. Alexander always considered his system a new type of education, and he believed new methods were needed because the old methods had failed so miserably. The first major problem with trying to learn through imitation is that it's actually quite difficult to ascertain from a demonstration how a gesture is performed. We can see the superficial details, obviously, but that doesn't tell us how to do what we're seeing. Let's think about this in a sphere other than posture. Say you wanted to learn the piano. You go to a teacher and ask for a lesson. The teacher sits down at the piano, plays a song, and then says, "Now do what I just did." Would that feel like much of a lesson? Do you think you could replicate what you saw? This problem is actually even more pronounced when it comes to posture because it's not easy to see what is happening in another person's body. You might see a movement of the head and not realize that there is a coordinated movement of the rib cage at the same time. You might see a shift of the pelvis, but not be able to discern how it changed. The funny thing is, if you do try to follow a demonstration, what's likely to stick out to you is what is wrong. Let's say you go to a teacher for a lesson in how to swing a golf club. Let's imagine the teacher is quite good, but that the teacher has a quirk in that they tend to round their back. When you watch them swing, it's not going to be easy to understand what they're doing to coordinate their arms with their torso, or how they're rotating their body through the swing. But their rounded back will probably stand out to you. And so, when you go to replicate what you've seen, you're likely to pick out the thing you could easily notice, the fault, the mistake, the rounded back, and replicate that while not understanding the more subtle and actually useful aspects of the demonstration. There's a quote from Delsarte's memoir that captures this problem perfectly. Delsarte was studying acting, and he was trying to perform a line for a play correctly, but he couldn't figure out how to deliver it in an appropriate way. So he went to his teachers for help. "Do as I do," they said to me, one after the other. "See here, watch my movements carefully." "I do watch, but I don't know how to go to work to imitate you. I don't seize the details of your gesture. It varied with every repetition. I don't understand why your examples, with which I am satisfied, lead to nothing in me." What's especially interesting to me is the parenthetical where Delsarte notes that the teacher's demonstration varied with every repetition. This is a clue that the teacher himself did not fully understand how he was doing what he was doing. But because of the teacher's experience or skill, he was able to deliver the line effectively enough. But how could Delsarte imitate that? The teacher could not explain to Delsarte how to do what was being demonstrated. The teacher really had no system. The teacher could only offer a demonstration, but there was nothing intelligible for Delsarte to work with. Since Delsarte couldn't apprehend which parts of the varying demonstrations were important, and couldn't replicate them when he tried, he was stuck. This illuminates the second major problem with learning through imitation. We often think we're doing something when we're in fact doing something else entirely. I can't overemphasize how frequently this happens, particularly in early lessons. We think we're moving our elbow forward, and really we are pulling it back. We think we're pulling our lower sternum back, when we're really pushing it forward. You might think you're replicating what you've seen in a demonstration, but chances are that you are not. This is why I emphasize that it's extremely valuable to video record yourself while you work. That way you can verify if you're actually doing what you intended to do, or if you're doing something else entirely. Even if you wanted to learn through imitation, this step would still be necessary for you to know if you're faithfully replicating the example or not. And think about it, how are you going to replicate what you've seen? You're going to use your habits of movement to try to reproduce the example you saw. Odds are that will cause you to just end up back in your habitual posture. If you want to change how you guide your movements, you can't just use your old habits to try to follow an example. We need a way to get around our habits. This leads me to the final problem we'll look at today. which is that imitating an example is not a reliable or repeatable method. It's not something you can use in your day-to-day life. Let's say you're going to sit into a chair. Are you going to think back to a demonstration that you saw? Will your memory of the demonstration be faithful? Will that memory translate into you actually being able to replicate the various movements that make up the gesture? I sincerely doubt it. So what can we use if demonstrations don't work? We can use directions. Directions can be remembered faithfully, and we can use them to literally guide ourselves through a series of movements. If we again think about something other than posture, let's say you wanted to build a complex piece of furniture. Would you rather watch a demonstration of someone else building the same furniture and then try to replicate what they did when you got home? Or would you rather have a set of directions that explained the steps in order of how to build the furniture? Which is going to be more valuable if you're having trouble? The directions that we use are the roadmap to sustainable change. They're an explanation of how to perform the gesture or adjustment, a series of steps that you can remember and follow. They are what you can practically use to outsmart and overcome your habits of movement. And we can use visual feedback by video recording ourselves to hone our ability to implement the directions accurately. Then, when we want to say, sit down into a chair, rather than calling to mind a fuzzy impression of something we saw someone else do, we will have a list of concrete steps that we've worked on before that will guide us through the gesture. The directions are what free you from being dependent on a teacher. If you need a demonstration to perform a gesture, you are reliant on the perfection of your teacher. If your teacher is not perfect, you will impersonate their faults. And I can tell you, no teacher is perfect. But if you have the directions, the explanation of how to move differently, you can implement those yourself whenever you want to, with or without a teacher. So in the future, if you see me advising a certain gesture or adjustment, and you wonder why I don't just demonstrate it for you so you can understand it, I hope you can understand why I typically will not give a demonstration. You won't learn half as much from a demonstration as you will from attempting to put the directions of movement into action with your conscious mind. And if you really want to learn about yourself and your use, you will video record yourself so you can go back and watch what you do. Compare what you really do with what you thought you were doing. The difference may surprise you. I'll close with a quote from Alexander that summarizes what we've looked at today. With regard to this question of the imitative method, I have frequently had to point out to vocal pupils that certain effects and capacities, which they hoped to acquire in a few lessons, were a result of a proper conscious knowledge on my part of the means whereby the voice is produced. To achieve these results, they must study and master the same principles. But they could never reproduce them by a series of imitative acts divorced from the knowledge of the processes involved and skill in using these processes. There is no royal road to anything worth having, and the imitative method of teaching seems to me pure charlatanry.